Yeah, you say that about we have, in order to capture this note of love, we have to destroy our ego, and yet, for us younger folks here, we grow up and we have to go to school and we have to get jobs and all that. We have all our lives ahead of us. So is there a way to capture that note of love and destroy our egos while still continuing getting our education and getting families and all that?
Yes, that's a very, very interesting question because, for example, Carl Jung said you shouldn't really do individuation until you are middle-aged because you need to spend the first part of your life actually creating your ego, developing yourself, and then you can go beyond it later in life. And yet there are souls who have come into this world who are not prepared to wait till they are middle-aged. And so you can have a dual process of evolution in which you develop your ego because you need to in this culture. You need to get educated. You need to think who you are. I'm a creative person, or I'm interested in mathematics, or whatever it is that is you develop yourself, and yet always have it in relationship to something higher within yourself. And then what happens actually is the ego, rather than blocking you off from the self, actually is nourished by the self. Because the self actually needs the ego to manifest in this world. The higher needs the lower. You need to have an individual sense of I in order to experience this world. You cannot live without an ego. The difference is that for most people, they develop an ego that does not develop in harmony with their higher self, that is just fueled by desires. I want this, I want this, I want this. But you can develop an ego that... I give another example. Say you have creativity, your soul is very creative, but you have to learn a technique to manifest that. So for example, if you're an artist, you have to learn how to draw, you have to learn how to paint. You learn those techniques so the higher self can manifest itself through you. And they're very particular techniques, and they used to be in the Renaissance, special schools that you went to master those arts, and then people were actually taught how to paint in relationship to the higher self. And those, of course, will be the schools of the future, because we're going to go back to an era where this world is not separate from the divine. And people of your generation are, in a way, the pioneers of a new consciousness in which the ego self doesn't have to be cut off from the higher self, where they can nourish each other. For example, when I grew up, nobody knew what spiritual was. It didn't exist. Meat and 2 veg and going to school, that was it. So there was no way the ego self I developed could grow up in harmony with my higher self. So my higher self went far, far away until one day when I was 16 and I got woken up. And then it began to come together. But it took quite a while to come together. So you can develop an ego consciousness that is a vehicle for your higher self, for your divine self, to experience this world, to have a relationship, to have a family, to have a job, and in which everything is not one, because if you see the oneness of everything all the time, you go crazy. But in which you see and value your own individual self, but you always see it in relationship to something higher. And that is, hopefully, how people will be educated in the future, in which we will go back to a sacred education as there always used to be in the past, when the worlds were not cut off, when the higher and the lower worked together, when the individual and the universal were in harmony. Yeah? And people like you who want that, who need that, who have the right to that, you won't have to go through this whole experience of being cut off from yourself and then having to rediscover yourself, because you never lost yourself. That is your birthright. And that is really, really important. Yeah? And so the ego self will then not be yes, some parts of the ego that are just after desires you have to educate. But the ego can be then a way for the soul to manifest, for the soul to live itself. It's a different ego. The ego then is actually permeated with light rather than blocking the light off.